Hello, everyone. It is that Weems guy here for yet another episode. And before we get started tonight, we need to report that the Magnificent Steve's surgery went well this week. He is still in the hospital. Hopefully, he'll get to go home on Monday or Tuesday, hopefully Monday. But as of this morning, he was still in the hospital. He is out of ICU. Um, and hopefully, Steve will be at home and will fill up to coming on here and telling you about how he's doing all in person. But with that out of the way, and Steve, we're hoping for that fast recovery, I'm going to now throw it to the That Weems Guy official center axis relock expert, Shane Gosa.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that. It's an honor to be here, sir.
You are the official center axis expert relock. We established that in your last visit on the show.
That actually, I didn't write that down on my piece of paper. So I probably need to add that one in to talk about. Uh, for what y'all don't, the inside joke with Lee and I is he was asking what I was going to talk about, and I said, "Okay, I can send it to you." And he was like, "You have an email? No. You have it this one? No. What'd you do? Write it down with a pen and paper? Yeah." And so I send Lee a copy of kind of the itinerary. It's like you started on the right side of the page and then ended up on the left. And then in the brief interlude between when he started the show, I added like five or six more notes all over the place. It's called mind mapping. Um, but we're gonna kind of talk about some of the people I've trained with over the years that some aren't here anymore. Some people probably have never heard of, or maybe only a few people have heard of, and kind of their methodologies behind the training, what I got out of it, and tie a bunch of stuff in together. But we can talk about the car system as well because that would fit into this.
I just find it amusing. Shane does actually have a center axis relock instructor certification.
Master instructor.
Master instructor, excuse me.
Yes, I have two
Excuse me.
two instructor certs from them, a standard and a master.
Well, there you go. You're not just a regular expert, you are like a real expert in it.
Oh yes, sir.
All right. All right. Well, first, I know that the name on the top of your list is going to be Jeff Cooper, but we're going to start actually talking about Paul Gomez at first.
That's fine.
I never met nor trained with Paul, and the reason we're gonna start with him first is I actually quoted him to a class this week, because I have seen this quote attributed to him in a discussion of what might constitute a weapon. I quoted Paul as I've read him many times. Anything's a weapon if you hold it right.
Hold it right. He had a T-shirt made up with a fist holding a screwdriver. He used to in downtime go into pawn shops and find the cheapest, most broken, rusty, whatever, screwdriver or knife or crowbar or whatever, and see if he could get it for less than $1. It was kind of a exercise he had to see how cheap he could get a weapon. And that was a comment he made in a lot of his classes. Anything's weapon if you hold it right, which kind of went to a mindset thing. I met Gomez because of the old TPI or Total Protection Interactive Forum that Craig Douglas used to run. And Gomez had been in the military, I believe the Army, because I'm sure it was the Army. He was in some unit in the Army, and then when he got out, he was a police officer in Louisiana. And at some point, he worked with. I know James Yeager at Tactical Response. I want to say he worked with Andy Stanford at OPS, but I may be getting that wrong. He may have just been friends with Andy. He did some co-teaching with Craig Douglas for a little bit in the early days of ShipWorks. And he had his own company called Gomez International. And he also was an instructor for the security forces at NASA for a contract. but he was unique in the training community. Encyclopedic knowledge of history, techniques, learned a lot from him. And he also had several systems he put together for various reasons. Um, what I can tell you about Gomez, very smart, very good teacher, and wide breadth of knowledge on a variety of subjects. He gun wise, because we're all gun guys, so we'll talk about guns. But gun wise, he started off carrying a 1911. And he eventually moved to and became a huge proponent of the Glock. And he did a class called Robust Pistol Manipulations. And there might have been 5 or 6 classes he taught before he passed away for RPM. And at least half of them were for me at my range. So I got to see a lot of the material and he developed it, each class. But basically, that was an entire 2 solid days of one hand weapon manipulation. So, what happens if you've got strong hand only? What happens if you have weak hand only? What's the best way to reload the gun? What's the best way to fix a failure to extract? What's the best way to fix a double feed? And so he would take a Glock and he would modify it in certain ways. One of the ways he'd do it is he'd make sure that he had some type of sights that he could use the rear sight to rack off of your belt or pocket or another object. Um, he stippled the grip frame of the gun to have a better control over it if your hands were wet or sweaty or bloody or cold. He went in and he was cutting the front of the frame where the lip of the magazine came up to, and he did a good 45-degree angle cut. So if you think of a Glock 17, he didn't reduce it to 19 length, but it was kind of halfway to 19 length, but just on the front. He later got a hold of a company called Gap Enterprises, GAP, and they made this weird little base plate, and it came to a point up front. And it was kind of a rounded point, but it was still pointy. And they made that for the Glock 26, 27, 33, and it kind of wedged your pinky finger up into the front area of the frame to give it more control. But what he found out was that on agency guns or guns you couldn't modify otherwise, he could use that magazine, and that magazine served the same purpose of if you had a double feed malfunction or a stuck magazine, you'd use the lip of that gap base plate to stick into your belt or your pocket or onto another object and rip the magazine off, thereby removing pressure from the slide stop and forcing up on the slide so that you could then clear the stoppage and the feedway in the chamber. So he had, and of course, I'm in the hotel like always. I live in hotels and tear out the walls, and I have an accountant pay for it all. But when I get home, I've actually got a sheet of all these specific modifications that he recommended. He's also a big proponent on a Glock of excess sights. And he was also a proponent of, and this back then we had 3rd-gen Glocks. That was what the latest was, but big proponent of a minus connector and a New York return spring. I think it was a New York one. It was the olive drab one, but that gave him more resistance to the trigger on the initial press because he thought that most striker fired guns had too light of a trigger. And it also gave him a more forced reset, which allowed him to use Bill Rogers' flip and press technique on the trigger reset more surely and quicker. And it also added reliability in environments that were less than hospitable. So He's from, Louisiana. If he dropped in the swamp or if you dropped in the sand or whatever, it would reset more forcefully and more reliably. So he had a handful of things he did to the guns. He liked Kydex. He was a proponent of outside the waistband Kydex holsters for some things. He was a early adopter of that. But one of the things he did recommend, and one of the things that was found out in the early ShivWorks classes, were that when you were doing that type of work, which Craig's brilliant in what he has developed over the years, and I don't think anybody else teaches that material. Or if they invented it, I don't know who else would have. Craig invented a lot of that material, and they came up with some really wonderful stuff. It's not something the average person. I know you've been through ECQC. I've been through it a handful of times. I've been through his arm movement instructors. I've been through his knife class, EWO. Brilliant instructor, brilliant course material, painful. You have to be a dedicated practitioner to go through it. It's a little much for most new people to absorb. Um, I've got a friend that probably goes through ECQC 2 times a year and has been for 15, 20 years. But it's great material. But one of the things they found out was that if you've got a pistol on and you go into a grounded evolution and someone is trying to take the pistol from you, if you have a Kydex holster on, and let's say you're on the ground and you're on top of your pistol and your pistol's, so ground pistol, you got a Kydex holster, it's pretty easy for someone to leverage the gun out of it. But if it's in a leather holster, just the leather against the metal with your weight on top of it prevents someone from being able to pull the gun out of the holster. So while the Kydex was much quicker to shoot from, the leather offered a little bit more comfort, and it also offered a little bit more protection in that specific scenario. Most people may not ever need that, but someone that's comes from the background Craig did of an undercover narcotics officer, that might mean the difference between life or death in certain situations. And that's one of the things over the theme of the show is context and where people get certain things from, right? And why it matters to one person versus another. But Gomez also he's the first person I ever heard about Frank repass from. Frank was the range master for Orlando PD. And he then went on to work at NASA, and that's where Gomez had met him. And so Gomez had this book he gave me of something called one-shot qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you can find it on the internet somewhere, but I had this huge book and I was looking, I was like, this is great, because it was one shot, a lot of it shot on review size IPSC steel. And it involved certain things like you had to do movement to get to where you were going to shoot, or you'd have to draw and you'd have to correct a problem, or just a variety of things. And he had a scale grading on it with time frames and hit probabilities and everything else. And I thought it was just, you can bring somebody out here and run them through 10, 20 different scenarios. And it was a pass fail, just about. So years and years go by, and I meet someone at Orlando PD. And one of the first things I asked him was, do you know, or did you ever work with Frank Repass? Oh, yeah. Frank was the range master that trained me to be, a range master. I said, man, where did he come up with those one-shot qualifications? That was brilliant. Oh, he forgot to order ammo for the agency that year. What? We just got busy. We had a lot of recruits. And we forgot to order ammo and it was too late. So he had to come up with a way to do this. So that's how that entire thing came about. So, necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah.
But I never have met Frank in person, but I gotta give credit for somebody that could come up with that, under pressure. So that was pretty unique. Gomez also, he's known as the AK guy. He had a whole system on how to deploy and use the AK. He liked it pretty simple. He wanted, a sling, iron sights. He wanted a safety that you could actually get to. Um, he liked Chinese magazines. The Chinese magazines did not have the spine coming off the back of the magazine. They're also like half a millimeter thicker. Um, so he had pretty much worked that entire system out, and he was kind of known as the AK guy as well. Of course, he passed away in his I believe early 40s. I believe he still has a YouTube channel, so you can go on there and take a look at that, and you can see some of the training that he espoused, and might have something on there about his gun modifications. And I harped on the Glock because that's what he carried, but they're suitable to a variety of modifications to different guns. I'll tell you this: I had a 1911 in one of his classes. I shot a 1911, and in that class, there was a drill where you came out right hand only, and you fired the round, and it went to slide lock, and so you drop the magazine, drop mag, put the gun back in your holster, put a new magazine in, and then you bring the gun back out, and you take the rear sight and you rack it on the front of your belt at a downward angle with a 45, degree angle, and it chambered me round, and then you came back up and shot. Well, I did that, but when it got to the point to chamber a round, the gun fired and the bullet impacted about 2 inches in front of my foot. Now, luckily, the entire thing was being videotaped because immediately everybody had thought I had my finger on the trigger, right? So, but reviewing the video, you could see my finger was completely straight. And what we come to find out is that when we were doing some dry fire manipulations after trying to figure out what was going on with the gun, basically the sear and hammer had worn to the point that you were getting hammer follow.
Mhm.
So when I chambered that round, it just bypassed everything, and it fired. But that was one of the things that convinced me that I did not like doing manipulations in front of me, because that was really close to losing my right foot. So I prefer to do them off the holster toward the side or either behind me. But you have to pay consideration to is what's your environment? Is
Yeah.
someone next to you? Is someone, all of that together? But one of the things was changed where I wanted to do manipulations with a gun. And it also gives credence to a great idea of having two of the same gun, right? So one that you take and you prove it works correctly, and then it gets shot maybe once a year for a qualification, but the rest of the time you've got a practice gun, and it doesn't matter if that thing wears out, because it's hard to tell on especially a 1911 how far something's gone, unless you're pulling the parts out and putting them on gauges or under a magnifying glass or whatnot. But learned a lot from Gomez. Who would you like to move on to next on my list?
Well, hold on just a second. I pulled up on my phone here. I've got uh, one of Frank Repass's one-shot pistol qualifications, and this would have come from either you or her. I don't remember which one of y'all gave it to me. Um, but
Probably
apparently,
me, because I actually like you
well,
and
there's
respect your position as the preeminent firearms instructor and shooter between the two of you.
Well, there is that. There is that. Um, it's got references in here, so a bibliography leads me to believe Kern.
Yeah,
But
probably so, because
all
I'm
right,
a little lazy for that one.
all right. References that it was in Ken Murray's Training at the Speed of Life, and that Walt Roush wrote about it in a 2005, September 2005 issue of Combat Handguns, page 74 and 76. But in this one, the target was a 6 by 10 inch steel plate or the A zone of a NIPSC or IDPA target at a distance of 5 yards. And the shooter will begin with the gun in the ready position, and the shooter must place the hit uh, in that zone in 1.55 seconds or less, and that was a pass fail. And
So to
if they made it through that, the second phase was they began with the weapon holstered and hands clasped in front, and then on the go signal with a barricade like 3 yards away, they had to move to that barricade to the right or the left. It's like a barricade simulating a doorway, and they had to draw and fire and put a shot on that target. 1.55 seconds or less was 100, and it was graduated down like 1.6 was a 99.5, 165 was a 99, and it went all the way down to 4 seconds at 80%. Anything below that was considered a fail.
so to give some clarity on some of that, the gun they would have been using would have been a double action SIG 226. They would have been using some form of Safariland holster, whether that was a 6280 or a 6360 or a 070, I don't know. But it would have been some form of Safariland holster. It would have been a double action 226 and 9 mm. And for the 5 yards and the steel, they use a lot of frangible ammo because they have multiple Rogers ranges on their range. They've got one of the nicer ranges I've ever seen, and they do a lot. I mean, they're one of the entire indoor ranges they have is nothing but Rogers ranges. And I know they still use a lot of frangible ammo because of that. So we talk about time frames a lot, and we talk about what kind of guns and whatnot. So I just was going to throw in what those were.
Right. Yeah. Because you got to look at the time frame of when that was. You know, Ken's book was written, and when that it was a 2005, I think, edition of Combat Handgunner. The firearms market was a lot different in 2005 than it is today. And so there wasn't the same, there wasn't but a few proven reliable designs out there, and the gear was much more limited back then too. Of course, you had more duty gear options, I think, than you do now, but for concealed carry gear, the options are much better now than they've ever been. Because now you've got basically in duty gear, you got Safariland and then a couple of minor competitors. But back then, you had lots of a lot of the leather makers were still out there producing duty gear and the like to compete with Safariland. Yeah, of course, Bianchi's now part of Safariland, isn't it?
They are, yes, sir.
They're the same company. Where have they always been the same company?
I don't think they have. I don't think they have. Bianchi, they don't currently really have a DD holster per se, but they're pretty big on the belts, the mag
Yeah,
pouches, radio, etc.
yeah,
And they kind of are the traditional leather concealment line
right,
of the Safariland wing.
yeah. So
So
excuse me, Smith and Wesson used to have a duty gear line.
they did.
And there were quite a few of the Davis leather produced duty holsters. You still had what were some of the big ones that were available back then? I know you had
For
just regular
Texas
duty gear.
Shoemaker,
Tech Shoemaker, yeah,
I don't know what year Milt Sparks quit doing actual like retention duty gear, but
yeah,
I think it was well up into the 90s
yeah,
that you could still get that.
yeah,
DeSantis actually had a few um, designs that were departures from the traditional, but they were
right,
retention holsters.
yeah,
Galco was still making some types of duty gear. They tried to get
right,
into the duty gear market for a while. Um, and there were a bunch of them that just came and
right,
went.
yeah,
G Code had the sock holster, the SOC, which is yeah, I think you can still find it on eBay, but it was revolutionary for back then.
Yeah.
You pressed a button and it sprung the hood forward. It was
Yeah.
all Kydex, but what was unique about it was that it the bottom half bolted on. So if you issued a 1911 and it had no light on it, but then you got put on a tack team or something, you could get a special Surefire Millennium light that kind of retrofitted with a rail system onto it. And then you could buy the lower cowl for the G code sock holster and bolt it on. And now you had a light bearing holster. I've got one in my drawer at the house. It was a pretty nice holster for the time. It was kind of the high speed option.
Yeah. Uh, Sighting systems are much superior now to what they were back in time when all this was written. So I'm saying this and wanted to explore that because I know the modern Instagram crowd goes 1.5 seconds was 100. No, you got to be sub-second and you got to do all this other stuff. Okay, the gear wasn't the same. Just flat out was not the same. From the firearms to the holsters to the sights thing, it was a completely different world back then than what it is now.
It is. It is. It's a different. Well, you robbed me of starting with Colonel Cooper, so this is as good a time as any to
Oh,
go
go
into
right
it.
there.
But
Go right there.
no, I think that is one of the current issues. Is it's a completely different generation and several
Mhm.
different generations now
Yeah.
than when he was around. So obviously he was not a common man. He was aristocratic. He's a lieutenant colonel of Marines, and he is very well educated, very well traveled, a lot of experiences. And he lived his experiences firsthand versus, and this is not a knock on the Instagram crowd, but, um, he lived his experiences firsthand as opposed to living vicariously through pixels on a screen that he held in the palm of his hand. He hated cell phones were just coming about, and he despised the idea of having instantaneous contact all the time. Because he thought that robbed him of actually living life. He'd much rather read a book, than read an article on the phone. And Greg Ellifritz had published something talking about the difference of blog hits he got from a few years ago up until now, and that everybody wants sound bites and little pieces of information, and long form writing like he puts out will eventually um, not be sustainable or profitable. The Colonel wrote about, and you'd have to actually get a book and read and find out where it was, but he wrote about someone that was in the Marine Corps, Brute Krulak. Brute Krulak. It was his commanding officer who ended up being the commandant of the Marine Corps, and then his son became commandant later. But after he retired, Brute Krulak had gotten into computers, and he estimated that somewhere around 2015, the majority of the population would not know anything about anything because they didn't have to go look it up. It was just right there, and they got an immediate answer, and then they moved on about their business. So, but I think one of the problems that a lot of people have is they just, oh, he's old fashioned, or times have changed, and this, that, and the other. Um, and that's true. Equipment's changed, times have changed. Winning mindset has not. Um, some of the ideas and hard won lessons have not changed. Some of the ways we go about it may have, but why do the great generals, why do the great tacticians study history? Because if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. So just because something may be a little old fashioned or not in the current cliquish area does not mean it's without merit, right? So that was one of the things I think, or that is one of the things that I think causes some heartburn about the colonel. Very outspoken, and he meant what he said, and he said what he meant, and he didn't care if it offended somebody. So one of the things I knew about him was early on when he was younger, he took other people's opinions, other people's writings, other people's advice. And he was, at one time, the first time he went off to war, he carried a Colt peacemaker because I think he had seen Elmer Keith write something about a Colt peacemaker. So that's what he did. And then over time, the last time he went out in World War II, and then his entire time when he was doing stuff for the outfit during a different conflict or multiple different conflicts, actually, he's carrying 1911. But when he first started shooting the 1911, he was a point shooter. He shot from the hip, and he's also a big shoulder holster guy. In fact, he had a holster from A.H. Hardy of Beverly Hills that was a spring break um, vertical shoulder holster. And he took that design to Milt Sparks, which became the #2 Hardy Cooper shoulder rig. And basically, the addition was of a belt slit in it so the holster did not flop around. Um, but over the years, as he evolved, he settled on the 1911. In 45, he settled on a strong side hip position, and he had a reason for all of that. And he carried a 45 caliber 1911 till the day he died. For the vast majority of the time, it was a all steel 5-inch government model. But when he had gotten into, I think when he hit at least 82, it was within the last 4 years of his life. It could have been before that, but it was in the last four. 80 something years old, back broken twice, man still walking around with a lightweight Colt Combat Commander and a spare magazine. And by a lot of guns today's standards, that's very heavy. I know how much problems I've had with injuries from fights and everything else with my back. And I know what kind of a pain it can be to carry a lightweight commander now. I'm half the age he was, and we aren't built like our grandfathers were, or even our
Right.
fathers. There's a reason they called him the greatest generation. The man was ready for war until with a twice broken back in his 80s. But he was once he found what he believed was the best solution, he stuck to it. And one of the things that all of the men that I'm going to talk about today, even if they're completely polar opposite in their teachings or equipment choices, one thing they all have is consistency. When they find a protocol that they believe worked, they stuck to it, right? So if the colonel wanted to carry the same gun in the same position, and he wanted you to load it the same way, unload it the same way, draw it the same way, he wanted consistency there because through proper repetition and consistency, he developed skill to where it became a second nature. Um, so um, the other thing about him was it wasn't a throwaway generation. He wasn't going to start over and start over and start over. If somebody came to him and said this gun is better, this is this, he'd look at it. But if he didn't think it was better, or if he thought it was just a fad, he would look at it, but he would dismiss it. And it's because he wasn't part of a throwaway generation. We're constantly getting this, getting that. They fix things. Their marriages lasted. They lived in the same houses. They worked at the same jobs. So it was basically they just their mindset was different, and they hardened up and they soldiered on. Um, he had conviction in what he did, but through proof, right? So he was able to prove something worked, and we discussed this in one episode. And he'd tell you, quite frankly, I don't care if you at the end, I don't care if you do Weaver. I don't care if you do isosceles. I don't care if you carry a Glock. I have what I feel works best for me and what I think works best overall. But if you can make that work and it's not unsafe, excuse me, um, or if it's combat survivable, then by all means go do what you're going to do. But he had conviction with proof. Um, so moving on, and I'm kind of going in an area of people I trained with. John Holsham, who I respect very much, at the time was with Insight. He and Greg Hamilton were with Insights Training Center. And John liked the SIG 228, and Greg liked a Glock 19. And they both liked Kramer inside the waistband leather holsters, and they both liked Spyderco Delicas. And the reason they liked those is because they worked. And then John liked the 228 because of the entity he was with for so long, and that was a common gun, and he had a lot of repetitions through it. Greg liked the plastic Glock because it worked. It was lightweight, it was compact, it checked a lot of bills. Both liked Kramer holster. It was good quality gear and concealed well, and you could buy one and have it for 20 or 30 years before you had to replace it. Like the Spyderco knives because they were good value for the money. They were reliable, and you could send them to Spyderco, pay $5, get them sharpened. They had a system set up with everything, and one of the things while they taught isosceles and they taught a different type of or form of shooting, the martial or mental aspect of it was very similar to the colonels, and they had a protocol of draw the gun this way, do it in a consistent manner, access it this way, load it this way, check it this way. But they were big on certain things. So I'm kind of laying framework for the school solution, right? So at the time, Gunside and Jeff Cooper, the school solution was a 1911 and 45 5-inch government model in a outside the waistband holster. But if you needed to conceal it, you could use a lightweight commander and an inside the waistband holster. But that was kind of their school solution. And then you go to Insights, and their school solution at the time was basically, a Glock 19 or a SIG 228 and inside the waistband Kramer holster and back it up with a Spyderco knife. Gomez's school solution was Glock 19 modified specifically for one-handed manipulations because something occurred to him, and I don't recall if we ever talked about it, but something either happened to him or someone he knew, or he developed some sort of mental lockdown on a black swan or worst case scenario where he felt it was needed that you practice excessively to the point that you could do one-handed manipulations under stress or duress. So people's experience is what creates the drive for them. So some people, which you and I don't understand it, but some people think you need the 1 second draw. And we've talked about this before. That's great when you're on a range standing tall and you know it's coming. But you don't see 1 second draws when you're seated in a car, when you're on the ground with somebody on top of you beating your head in. You don't see them when the first indication that you're in a gunfight is you take a round to the back. You can't be aware all the time, no matter how good you are. You can always get got. And often we hear the proponent of the sub 1 second draw is, well, if I can do it in sub 1 second, then on the street, then I'm just going to be faster no matter what. Maybe, maybe not, but that's one of those deals is something happens to people, they get in their heads and it's emotional. And that's what drives us. I do that. You do that. Everybody's got something that we have a mental bias towards for the training. Um, Next guy is Mario Martinez. Mario Martinez was a friend of mine. He was the command.
Before you get into Mario, let's just point out that Holston is still active. Very, very much, I think, under heralded in the business. Uh, Not by people who know him because they all think very highly of him. Uh, John just keeps a lower profile. He doesn't have like a huge social media presence and the huge Instagram thing, and so people just the current generation just doesn't know him all that well. John's one of those guys that I learned from him when he asked a question. That's this is like he's not even telling you anything. He what from what he asked, you learn things. And
He's
John, I
he's a
think,
modern Sun Tzu, and he's the
yeah,
last of the true quiet professionals.
he is a very, very, very good instructor. He comes on the show quite frequently, but he's still out there active in the business. He's trying to quantify some things that, like, so, the people claim that, shoot these sub-second split, or excuse me, sub-second draws, sub-quarter second splits. Well, he's out there with the technology trying to quantify, okay, if you're running that hard, how long does it take you to stop? That kind of thing. Very, very, very thoughtful. And I'm pretty sure I know you said he was, carried the 228. I think he has evolved to a Glock 48 now. The last couple of times we've shot, that's what he's been carrying.
He I think the last class I took from him might have been '06, '07, and he was carrying a Glock 19 then.
Yeah,
He had switched over that because the 228 was kind of cycling out
yeah,
of production or service,
yeah,
and he shot his enough that he cracked the frame on him,
yeah,
because he shoots a lot, or he did. So
yeah.
the 48 would kind of be a an expected, evolution at this point.
Right. And he is a currently living on the West Coast, and so the 10 round capacity is a thing. So why not go with a gun built around that?
Um,
I wouldn't want to take him on. I know that.
no, no.
Yeah. Even with him limited to 10 plus one and me unlimited, I shall not mess with
No,
John.
because he's got sneakiness and trickery and
Yeah.
wisdom on his
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. I said something to describe him to somebody once as John was fighting our bad guys when they spoke Russian, and he was still fighting our bad guys when they started speaking Arabic. And I say he's been around for quite some time, actually, in the soup. And John will be part of the Cognitive Conclave this year, which will be the last weekend in October here in Martin, Georgia. All right, now on to Mario Martinez.
He's commander. He had some intelligence background. He was commander of the third largest sheriff's office SWAT team in the nation at the time. Um, he's involved in a lot of stuff that's not relevant to the podcast, but he had a lot of experience. And I met him because he was contracted by an agency I worked for to come in and provide ongoing training to certain people for a while. And so then I went and outside of that took a submachine gun instructor program from him. And one thing led to another. I ended up working for him for a little bit, but he he was a big 1911 guy, but he had switched over to a Glock, and this was in the early 2000s. And I was still, carrying a 1911 without a light rail, and if I wanted capacity, I'd have to get a Wilson 10 round magazine, but it didn't keep up with, the 40 was still kind of the hotness at the time. So it
Yeah,
didn't keep up with a Glock 35 with a 15 round magazine and then a Graham Engineering plus 4 or 5 round magazine on top of that with at the time, revolutionary Streamlight M3 65 lumen LED weapon mounted light. So I'll never forget, I was taking two things happened. One was we were doing some building clearing stuff, and I had a 1911 with a handheld light. and we get to a room, and one of the bad guys was hiding in the closet, right? Well, I didn't know exactly what to do because both of my hands were tied up. So what do you know? It was a whole thing about learning and um, working out. Well, what do you do with your pistol? What do you do with your light if you drop your light? How are you going to recover it? Do you have a second light on you? Even if you do put your pistol up, do you put it up? Do you not put it up? Do you put both of them up? How do you control the person if they're combative but they don't reach for your pistol? And all these questions going on. So that that gave credence to, well, you might want a system that does have a weapon mounted light so that in that situation you could search with your handheld, and then if you needed to you could drop the handheld, and if you still needed to shoot with a light you have a weapon mounted light, or you could drop the handheld and holster your pistol and you still had a light if you had to draw your pistol back out. So but that was one of the first things that told me, hey, it might be a good idea to have a light on your gun for certain law enforcement operations, right? And later on in another class with him, it was a very, very high round count shooting drill. And it had nothing to do, and a lot, that's one of the things, Jeff Cooper asked, is it practical, right? Is the equipment you're carrying, is the technique you're using, is the drill you're shooting, is it practical, right? Is it practical? um so the drill was not a practical from a straight standpoint drill, but it was a skill drill. And that's where I think a lot of people get mixed up nowadays. Is it a skill drill, or is it a tactically applied drill? You know, um, how often are you going to have to go through two or three magazines on the street if you're hitting what you're shooting at? And probably not very often.
Right.
So, but that was one of the things, is it was sort of like the entire line was moving while you were shooting. Okay. He got the drill from either Marcinko or Karachi or Harry Humphreys or one of those original Dev Group guys, because he was hooked in with them, used to teach with them. But the entire line was moving while you were shooting, and I kept running out of ammunition because I was shooting a 10 round, 1911 45. Everybody else was shooting 15 round 40s or 17, 18 round nines or whatever. I'll never forget him screaming at me, learn to keep up, reload faster. You're the one that chose to carry that limited capacity weapon,
Yep.
you know. So at that point, I was like, huh, because I'd started getting exposed to something more than what I had. I'd stepped out of a one box where I was really good at something and then put into a brand new territory, right? So I was like, well, yeah, it might be easier to shoot one-handed with a gun that has less recoil. It might be easier to do more things if you have, or manipulate your weapon less. That's, I've never trained with him, but that's a Clint Smithism. I like more rounds on board, not so I can shoot more, but so I can manipulate my weapon less. Because you talk to Tom Gibbons and he'll tell you that um, you're very likely to miss your first shot after a reload or after a malfunction, because it's reset your OODA loop and you've got to get everything back right. So maybe, just maybe, it might be better to have more capacity on hand, not so you can shoot more, but so you can manipulate the weapon less if need be. But Mario had, he liked 1911s, but he had moved to Glocks. He started with 1911s. He ended up moving to Glocks. He liked the MP5, but he kind of moved over to the M4. at some point. Um, he was very, very early proponent of weapon mounted lights, very early proponent of high capacity weapon systems. And one of the things I learned from him was to constantly evolve. So even if his thought process was great, this has been working for 10 years for me, but this new thing gives me a 25% increase in performance. That's fine with me. I'll train on that for a little bit and get trained up on that. I'll ditch the old and moved on to this. And it wasn't chasing performance. It wasn't chasing, to a degree, performance, but it wasn't chasing inconsequential increments, right? There was an actual advantage to this. So he always evolved, and he tried just about anything, but it had to be immediately significantly an improvement. But he was not scared to dump something just because he'd had it for a while if something else was going to give him more of an advantage. And that is not a that is not converse to what I said about the kernel, because time has started moving so much more rapidly now, right?
Yeah.
The what was available uh, in the 90s was very, very slowly evolving. What we have now, stuff is evolving within
Yeah.
months or a year or two. We have a lot more stuff going on overseas. And those guys are going over there and they're saying, hey, this works, or this failed, this failed, this failed. We got to change it. This works better. And they're getting more exposure. And it takes a long time for that to filter into law enforcement and the private training sector and everything. But we're moving at a pace of technology and speed now that just was not the case in the 90s or even the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Um, Super
Yeah.
Dave, go ahead.
Well,
I'm
just
sorry.
for, case in point, I've been a Glock 19 guy for forever. Uh, and it's still the gun I probably shoot the best overall out of anything, except for maybe a CZ-P10C. Um, but you look at the technology that has changed in a smaller package, like the 365 macro, the TACOS version, not the one with the velocity reducer on it. Uh, you get 3 more rounds in a smaller gun that's easier to conceal. Now, that's kind of a thing to consider there. Do I carry this package that's easier to hide and I've got more ammunition on board? I may give up a little bit in shot to shot performance, but I can still shoot it effectively enough to get the job done. You know, will Glock ultimately be forced into, generation 7 or 8, skipping away from everything it's done since its inception to start embracing some new magazine technologies? I don't know, but that's where we're evolving. We've seen the new Aimpoint Koa come out on the Glocks this year. Yet another footprint, another mounting system, but this one looks like it could be the real deal. From everything we're,
It's moving in the right direction.
yeah,
That system is definitely moving in the right direction, and it addresses some of my gripes with dots.
yeah.
But that's way over on that side of the
That's on the other
page,
side of the page.
page
If we
down.
read it, in like Eastern text, where we start and we go left, right to left instead of left to right,
It works out.
it works out right. All right. Who was you
Uh,
wanting? Who
and
were you
that's
wanting to
Super
go to
Dave,
next?
Dave
Super Dave.
Harrington.
Yeah. Yeah.
Known Dave for a long time. The first class I ever took from him was 3 days of dry fire at a cabin in the North Georgia mountains. So there were like 3 people in the class, and I showed up and I had a Glock 19 with a Surefire X200 because the 300 wasn't even a beginning thought. And I learned he basically spent 3 days of dry firing with him. And one thing led to another, and I had him come down and teach a lot of classes for me. One of the last formal classes I've taken in the last 7-8 years was a Super Dave class up in Athens. Took a buddy of mine up there and just gotten out of the Navy, and we went up and took a Super Dave class. And Dave is one of the rare ones. He falls into the Masada, Tom Gibbons, John Farnum crowd. Doesn't matter what it is, you put in their hand, and they're going to shoot it. It can be a in-frame 41 Magnum revolver. It can be a Colt 25 automatic vest pocket model. Can be a Smith & Wesson 1006, or it can be a 1911, or it can be a Glock 48, and they're pretty much going to shoot it with a really high degree of skill. So, but Dave is kind of weapon agnostic. He likes his 1911s, he likes his Glocks, but you can put anything in his hand, he's going to shoot it. He shot for Team Beretta, shoot AKs, M14s, M4s, iron sights, optics, whatever. One of the things I learned from Dave was a winning mindset and adaptability. So doesn't matter what position you're in, doesn't matter if you're injured, doesn't matter if you don't have all of your faculties physically about you. Dave would put you in so many different scenarios and show you how to overcome them. He was built. I'm pretty sure Dave is a DARPA cyborg somehow, but he was trying to replicate that. I don't know if he's teaching much anymore or not, but he does have some videos out there, and you can learn from him. He taught me a lot about mindset. He taught me a lot about it doesn't matter. Harden up and get through it. Soldier on, and think of how you can get yourself out of this. Don't just shoot. Don't just build a skill mentally. Strengthen your mind's ability to interpret your situation and your environment, read it, and work through it. So his class was pretty intense. I was always sore and tired for a long time after you got through with the class. But he had a reason for doing what he did. It wasn't necessarily for everybody, but I always thought he was a brilliant instructor. I talk about him a lot. I'm going to bring him up specifically again. Randy Cain. Randy's retiring. Your chance to take a class with him is now extremely limited. A lot of people say they want to do it and they don't, and it's going to be too late before long.
Yeah.
So Randy is one of the last classically trained instructors. He is, and I haven't seen anybody else better yet that's in the business today, but he's probably the best diagnostic instructor there is in the business, and he's probably the last, and if he's not the last, he's the best of the general purpose rifle instructors. So if you want to run a bolt gun in a format like Jeff Cooper started and perfected, Randy's the last of the guys that you can learn how to do that from. His doesn't matter if it's handgun 101 or it's his advanced handgun class, doesn't matter if it's carbine or what. Anything you take from him is going to be top notch. Now, Randy is very consistent. As long as I've known him, he's carried a 1911 and a J frame. He likes 870 shotguns. He likes Winchester pre-64 model 70s, and he likes ARs. And he runs them consistently. And Randy's got a martial arts background as well. That's where some of the mindset comes in from, and philosophy. But Randy wants you to execute the basics on demand perfectly over and over under any condition. But he may not have a class that some people think is high speed, but he's truly high speed in some of the stuff he does, right? Just
Yeah.
because it's not a super high round count, just because you're not jumping through a flaming hoop or doing a SWAT roll across a hood. He can do some stuff that you look at it and you think, okay, it's going to be a piece of cake, and it's not, you know. But he teaches perfect execution and extreme control of your environment under whatever circumstance it is, right? So it's consistent, 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 and he does it in a short amount of time with a small amount of rounds, and it doesn't matter what kind of. Last class I took from him, you had people all over the place with iron sighted 1911s and red dot Glocks and retention holsters and concealment and whatever. It doesn't matter. You show up and he can teach you to use whatever you've got. Like Jeff Cooper, he doesn't suffer fools. It's going to be as safe as a range with live firearms can be. He's there to impart knowledge, right? You'll have a good time. And if you get a dry sense of humor, you can probably pick up on his. But if anybody's considering it, you probably better book it, because those last few classes he's going to teach are going to fill up pretty quick.
Yeah, he's
Um,
been one that his schedule and mine just never have been able to get in line with each other. And I have tried and tried and tried to make it work to get to one of his classes. He signed up for one of mine and then got snowed in. And I saw him post that this last bit of upcoming classes he has will be his last. And I immediately went to the calendar, and I have a conflict with almost every one of them. And I just don't see that I can make it work to get into one of those due to
and
some job things. And I mean, I hate it because I really want to take a class from him.
the same here. I don't know that it'll line up, but I had a handful of classes from him. Never had a basic class from him, and I've actually thought about, hey, I'm going to go take a basic class from him, because I think there's merit in that. I think that um, probably if I went and took a basic class from him, he'd fix a lot of my problems.
Yeah,
Just
the
starting from
handgun
a
101 class, excuse me, the handgun 101 class is one I've always wanted to take from him. Of
got
course, I would love to take any of his shotgun stuff, the practical rifle. He's got a revolver class. I'd love to take any of it, but that 3 day 101 class is the one I've tried to get to, and it just hasn't worked out.
there are a handful of people that every year just come to that. I mean, they take other classes from him, but they
Mhm.
come take that one specifically for a reset,
Yeah,
wipe out the
yeah,
bad habits and go from there.
yeah.
Um, Kelly McCann. Um, Kelly's former Marine. He founded the Special Operations Training Group, did some work for some outfits, and did a lot for this country clandestinely. And he owned a company called the Crucible up in Fredericksburg, West Virginia. Kelly's first person to put a red dot on a modern combat pistol.
Hold on a second. Fredericksburg, Virginia or West Virginia?
Virginia. I hold on. Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Yeah,
I got Novaks on my brain, but no,
yeah,
Virginia,
yeah,
Virginia. So I was thinking about Parkersburg, West Virginia, with Wayne Novak,
yeah,
home of Novak's 45 shop.
yeah.
But no, Kelly was, an early adopter of the Glock 19 back when it was a second gen. Early adopter of a short barreled M4, put a Trichcon reflex on the short M4, and had his Glock 19 milled for a doctor optic. Um, he is one of those that is about consistency as well, right? Okay, you can hold this group at this time frame standing. do it from seated, do it from your stomach, do it from your back. Now, do it this way, do it that way. Right. So over the years, he still has a thing for 1911s because he's a Marine and American, but still carries a Glock. Um, he had a lot of input in the design of the Trijicon RMR. And he still carries a Glock 19, still carries it with a dot on it. Uh, he was an early adopter. He carried leather. In fact, the Kramer IWB number 3 he designed for one of the units he was in charge of. He also used an Elmer McAvoy surprise special, which was a version of the summer special. And I'd read about it in some articles he'd written, but I've actually got a left hand one of those that Paul Gomez gave me. That's a little bit of tidbit of history. Elmer McAvoy was, I think, he was in Idaho too. But he was a holster maker. He was an old school holster maker, and he's very niche. You had to be in a certain clique to know who he was. Got one of those at the house, but Kelly started off with that. And over the years, he's moved to Kydex. He was a big proponent of Blade Tech. I don't know if he's still using that or not, but he was one of the first adopters of Blade Tech. But his is about threat assessment and practicality, right? So it's kind of frowned upon to do a gun rotation, like exchange it with the color of your shirt or your
Mhm.
accessorize, because it's not a talisman, and anybody
Right.
that's serious realizes that. But also, Kelly was like, well, it's not always, a Glock 19 is not always going to be the thing that I need. Sometimes it might be a 642, a J frame, and then sometimes it may be a C camp 32 is all I can get away with. He likes to say he feels very well armed with a C camp 32 and a non confrontational attitude. He's also a literal suitcase nuclear weapon without a gun on him. He's the premier combatives instructor in the world. He's just a little ball of pain. If he cooks off on somebody, they're just done. And he carries bridge weapons. He was one of the first proponents of bridge weapons, whether that be a sap or a stick or pepper spray or open hands or whatever. But he is one of the things I learned from him is remove all the excess, strip it down to its most simple and core requirements, right? So get rid of wasted movement, get rid of excess stuff that you don't need, and become adaptable, right? So that kind of keys in with some of the stuff with insights. That kind of keys in with some of the stuff from Super Dave. But there's not much out on him. He still teaches. I believe his company is called Combatives,
Mhm.
Kembativ. He'll still teach. He'll still teach a very simple yet highly effective program. Combatives, knife, pistol, and then he's got one of the best mindset awareness 2 hour lectures I've seen. And it might actually be 4 hours. I don't remember. Very humble. He's not going to tell you everything he's done. Brilliant instructor. And he have invented a lot of things that people have no clue he's the one that invented them. So he'd be well worth your time because I don't know how much longer he'll be teaching. Um, John Farnum, who's the godfather at this point, of firearms training. He started doing his traveling training gig when Jeff Cooper was doing his. Um, Decorated Marine Corps officer in Vietnam, um, deputy sheriff. At one point or another, John wrote the lesson plans for pretty much every federal firearms or federal agency's firearms instructor program. Created a bunch of different things. Has a handful of books out. His wife Vicky has one of the better books on training women. But John's one of those that is a master of everything, right? So every time he see John, he's going to have a different type of gun. Now, it's probably going to be in the same carry location. Um, but the only thing it's going to have in common from the last gun is that it shoots bullets too. You know, different action, different capacity, different controls. Um, but he makes it work, and he makes it work at a high level. And the reason he does that, the reason Moss does that, is because they train so many people, and they understand that one gun is not going to work for everybody. So they're constantly evaluating, they're constantly looking at that. So when they have somebody come through their class, they can tell, hey, this is the way that you work with this, or this is the quirk for this, or I can recommend this, or I can't recommend that. Um, John's got some niche things. He's got some tried and true things. But he's again a brilliant firearms instructor. He's got his own blog, Defense Training International, DTI Quips. Um, he's a good man, and if you get a chance to train with him, you should do that as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I want to say 77, 78 years old. Surrounding
he's
there.
on up there. I do not see as much as I am uh, as much as I am all over the place and worn out all the time. I
Hmm.
don't see how he still does what he does like an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah,
You know, he'll be going until he can't go anymore. But we never know when that is. So
yeah.
I learned a lot. In fact, the very first I went to the NTI back. I don't know if it was in 2000. It had to have been 2000, 2001.
Mhm.
And I was a young cop, and Skip Gokenauer that used to run it said, "Hey, I've got just the partner for you. I've put you with a friend of mine for the NTI." Oh, okay. Who is that? John Farnum. And so went into eh, he'd secured the banquet room for John to eat lunch, so people wouldn't constantly asking him questions and everything. So the first time I
Mhm.
met John Farnum, I had a cheeseburger with him in the dining room. You know, it's just us, and so he was my partner for the NTI. And then years and years later, I had him come and teach a DTI instructor school for me.
Mhm.
Um, but
Attended by one, Clark Sparrow.
yes, who called me the other day, and as normal, leave me a message. I probably won't call, so I'll get back to call him in a week or two. But
Uh,
yeah, John's a great guy. I like him a lot. I learned a lot from him, and
yeah. What impresses me about him is that as long as he's been around, like you get a TACCON, he will, if he's not teaching, he is in a presentation as a student.
oh, absolutely, he is that's one of the things I learned from him is
Yeah,
always a student,
yeah,
and he always has something new because he's constantly evolving.
yeah,
So
yeah.
but having said that, you read some of his books, they may be 30 years old or so,
Hmm.
and the majority of the information is still solid, you know. So um
And we are
Claude
at
work
we're about an hour and 15 minutes right now.
I gotta move fast then, don't I?
Yeah,
Um Claude Werner, the tactical professor. Claude and
yeah.
I had known each other for a very long time. We've traveled across the country together. Claude's former captain of Green Berets. He did some clandestine work for the United States government. He was the head instructor for the prestigious Rogers Shooting School. And
Wait a minute, wait a
Claude,
minute, wait a minute. That is the elite Rogers shooting.
elite, excuse me, elite Rogers Shooting School. Claude has a very, very, very high skill set. And Claude has trained some very high speed guys. Yet he looks toward practicality, right?
Mhm.
So, what does the ordinary man? The ordinary man's not going to be walking around with a red dot and flashlight equipped high capacity pistol with three reloads and a spare magazine and this, that, and the other. That just doesn't happen. Even if people say they do,
Yeah.
A lot of times they end up with a Glock 48 in a fanny pack or a J frame in their pocket, or worse yet, the gun left in the glove box of their car,
Mhm.
right? So Claude, Claude approaches everything from a very, very realistic and practical level. And a lot of people don't realize who he is or the pedigree he has. But if Claude talks, I tend to listen because Claude is, I wouldn't be surprised if, hey, I think he's Mensa level smart. So if he's thought about something, if he's actually going to put it out there or put it on paper, probably a good idea that he has thought about everything, so his opinion is at least worth considering. But Claude is where I learned, which I'll tie in the rest of this with. But Claude is where I learned just because it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody else. You know, and that ties into the fact that I've always been able to uh, go places with a concealed 1911 or Glock 17 and spare mags. And when I say concealed, sometimes it's covered. If somebody
Yeah.
looks, they can tell it's there. And there's really not consequence for me.
Right.
Yet someone else, they could be facing termination, they could get arrested depending on where it was, and so on and so forth. Um, what I have found is while I still have a good bit of leeway in what I carry and where I go, um, the way the world is now, sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, right?
Yeah.
So there are and I carry a gun that is Glock 48 sizes,
Yeah.
uh, get close dimensions with a dot on it, right? I still carry inside the waistband. Um, I can conceal that under an untucked shirt, but there tends to be a bulge. And over the last 6 months or so, I've noticed people that don't know me but know what they're looking for give extra glances or linger a little
Mhm.
bit too long. So, depending on where I'm at in the country at the time, I may not be carrying that. I may be carrying something smaller that literally disappears under it. Now, it's still going to be an inside the waistband holster, but there are times when I'll have a spare mag in a pocket, and I'll have a smaller gun than that on my person because it disappears. And is it going to be as effective as this, that, or the other? Well, I don't know. Obviously, depending on whatever scenario you can dream up, maybe, maybe not. I still hit the A zone of an IPSC target with 50 yards. Might take me half a second longer. Um, and I may have to reload it more, but the question becomes practicality. What is the answer? And when we look at all these different instructors, there's usually a school solution for something, right? Um, that's what they see that works in the majority of their classes. That's what they see as reliable. That's what they see as you can afford it, you can access it, it has accessories, etc. That's what works for the vast majority of people, which goes back to Jeff Cooper. And this is what I've chosen. This is what works. But then we have to look at the flip side of Claude's idea of, well, that may not work. So for
Mhm.
everyone, right? So the school solution is not always going to be the overall best solution. And there are times that you basically have to ask yourself, um, what's the threat? What is my threat level? Okay. Yes, black swan events can happen. But I think that sometimes we put too much emotional emphasis on it. And it's different for everyone. So for some people, it may be a optic equipped staccato, right? For other people, it may be a Ruger LCP Max. what's the threat level, and what does your life allow? Not many people can afford to lose their job over carrying a gun, and not many
Yep.
people can afford to just pick up and say, I'm going to go to a different job because I want to carry this gun or that gun. And having one is much better. Legally, having one with you is much better than leaving in the car because it got too uncomfortable or it got this, that, or the other. And, if you use your mindset and learn avoidance, then hopefully you can get yourself out of more situations that way. You can't always. And I do not fault anybody that has the dedication to carry a full size or mid size gun with an optic or anything everywhere they want. I don't discredit them at all. I think that's great, but just not everybody can. And over the years, I've tried, or I have learned not to get so wrapped up, because it's not. What is your company's motto?
Help may be on the way, but you're already there.
No, the arrow.
Oh, there's you talking about the logo?
Yes,
Oh, that's an arrow with a scroll.
but no, no, no. It's not the Indian or
That's not me. Which
that's not you.
no,
Uh,
there's an old saying that it's not the Indian, it's the arrow.
okay, I'm sorry. I
But
got
that's
that.
not me.
Okay, it might have been Hearn. I don't remember. I get that. I get that saying mixed up,
Uh,
but it's pink.
Hearn's big one is it's not the odds, it's the stakes.
That might be it too. I
Yeah,
like yours better,
yeah,
by the way. But
yeah. Thank you.
um, but that's that. As I have gotten older, uh, I want something that is lighter and something that is handier, right? I can't do what I did even 20 years ago. And that's a real thing. And vanity and ego is a real thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to use discretion and wisdom over strength and attitude, you know.
Mhm.
So, but it's a balance for everything. The Koa, so it locks in, it's wedged in from the front, and then it goes down and it's attached by some screws into the slide. It helps take the brunt of the recoil on the front of it as opposed to the screws. You're going to see a lot more new optics mounting systems coming out now. Before we had looked at saying like the Acro or the 509T or the Steiner with the single crossbolt mount was the best one. What I've seen over the last year or so is even those have issues. Depending on the material the screw is used and depending on how it's torqued properly, that screw can actually lengthen and those optics can start having some looseness to them. I've had that reported a good bit to me. I've seen it a few times. There are 10 billion issues with the two screws going into the top of the or through the top of the optic into the slide, depending on who the manufacturer of the optic, depending on who the manufacturer of the gun is, depending on what size screws and what length screws. You run into issues with that. So the COA is moving toward the correct direction. There are a few other things on the market currently that are moving in the correct direction of that. Nobody's got it figured out. Some of the stuff's better than others. Um, Optics are going to continue to evolve. I have my opinions on them, and everybody else has their opinions. So I can take them or leave them. I think they give me better performance under most situations. I think that, especially with the way my eyes are, they let me do some things that I used to be able to do, but I can't anymore with just iron sights. But the downside to it is that they're harder to conceal unless you're wearing appendix, which I've done it and I don't fault anybody that does. It's just not my thing. You do yours, I'll do mine. They have
I
some
may
issues.
have seen you carrying a Flux Trader appendix recently.
You did, yes, but that was just a demonstration of how to get the thing out quickly. There's no way I could walk around for more than like 3 minutes with that thing in there.
Yeah.
But you know, open emitters versus closed emitters, you got to take care of open emitters better. I don't like the terminology open because duty grade, the emitter is closed. So, open housing or single glass housing versus enclosed dual glass housing, whatever. The open, you got to take a little bit more care of. People that don't want to take a lot of, if they kind of want the easy button solution, that's not necessarily the greatest thing. But we switched to dual glass, and there's a slight problem. Depending on where the sun's at, if it's behind you, you can't see your dot and you can't see your sights. If you got a flashlight and you've got it in neck index, it hits the back of the optic, you can't see your dot and you can't see your sights. You crack the front lens, okay, you can still see your dot. You crack the back lens, you may not be able to see your dot at all. You drop your gun into a mud puddle or whatever it is, and you crack the front lens and water gets inside of it, it doesn't work anymore. As far as picking up the dot, because that water may get into a certain area of it. But it does make it easier to keep dirt and debris out of the optical housing. It does prevent, it's easier to wipe mud or blood or a milkshake or coffee off of the back glass. It keeps, it does, it's one of those things where you've got to decide again what works best for you. So if an enclosed emitter works best for you, then do it. Don't listen to somebody that says this is the only way, because there's there's more than one way to skin a cat. But lower mounted optics are easier to pick up. That's one of the reasons I like the Hollison SCS so much, is because it's very low mounted optic. Reason I like the Sig Romeo X's is because they're very low mounted optics. And I find that the lower you mount the optic, the quicker you can pick it up, right? I do like the Trijicon SRO, but I do not like the durability of the optic. In a duty setting, in an exposed duty holster. More than likely, it's fine for a concealed holster and things like this. Very quick with the way the glass is cut and how sharp the dot is and the shape of the glass and a variety of other factors. It's a very quick, very accurate optic. I've done some of my best shooting with an SRO, but I won't carry one into harm's way for serious purposes because I don't think it's duty grade, right?
Yeah.
So I think I talked about at somewhere I talked about blue dots.
Yeah.
Blue is one of the things that's coming out. There are a few companies that have them now. Hollison's got their gold dot. So we're going to start seeing better battery life, better mounting solutions. It's evolving, but pistol mounted optics are now evolving almost at a rate as iPhones or
Yeah.
computers. It's just hard to keep up. One safety consideration. So most 1632 and 2032 batteries now are coming with a child coating on them. So somewhere along the way, some kid ingested the batteries. Apparently, it happened enough to cause a change in the industry. So now there's a bitter coating on the batteries. So when you go to buy those batteries, Duracell will have a picture of a baby on it, and it will say something about bitter coating. Do not make the mistake that I did and buy some Energizer ones, and because you didn't see it, and then the fine print tells you it has bitter coating on it. And then you have a bag full of Energizer batteries that you can't use. in your pistol mounted optic. So what that coating does, what we found out is that it puts some sort of barrier between the electronics. And so it will make the optics blink in and out. It may make it where the optic doesn't have a good current at all. And in between shots, it may turn itself on or off. I do not think there's a good way to get all of that coating off of the optic. You can try, isopropyl alcohol, several other things, but the best solution is to source batteries without that. So you're probably not going to be able to buy them in a store. You're probably going to have to buy them offline. My preferred battery is Duracell. I think they work better and more consistently than any of the others. I'll take Energizer after that, then after that Panasonic, then after that Toshiba. But you're going to have to start finding them online. So to your guest or your audience that carries a pistol mounted optic and they're using a 2032 or 1632 or whatever the numbers are battery, just be aware of that and look for the bitter or child coating on those, because I'd hate for them to get that and then think they had a problem with their optic, or for them to have a problem with it in the middle of a critical event.
Yeah,
So,
ProCell is the same company as Duracell, by the way.
okay.
Yeah. So I've seen some good things out about their batteries here lately. All right. We are a little past an hour and a half. Any closing thoughts?
No, that's about it, because I probably talk about another half hour on stuff and just ramble on. And I know this is
Yeah.
going back and forth, but key thing is keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Consider that there might be more than one solution, and just because
Yeah.
your favorite instructor who does actually have it all together can pull some off doesn't mean that it will for you. So you
Right.
can look at ulterior sources. Mentioned Greg Ellifritz. His blog is a clearinghouse. Every Friday he does knowledge dump. So he searches and looks at the stuff. So you can get all sorts of information about every subset you want to from his thing, and go to his blog and look at it, and go to Claude Werner's, to the tactical professor. He puts all sorts of good stuff on there as well. And then, as I've harped on before and before, if there's that instructor you want to train with, make a way to do it, because the end of an era is coming, and the last of the greats are slowly but surely retiring.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's kind of a small group behind those guys, but then after that small group, it's all Instagram warriors, and I'm not optimistic for what's going to be out there for the training world after that. But maybe people rise to the occasion. Maybe
Yes, sir.
hopefully the world stays peaceful and we don't get another mass learning event. But that's not the way of the world.
No.
Not the way of the world. Well, Shane, thank you for coming on here tonight. A very short notice. I think we have 23 minutes from time to, yeah, let's do the episode till hitting the go button. Um, to get this together tonight. So thank you for coming on tonight and spending your time with us. And to the audience, we know that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us. And we are out.